Good afternoon. Actually, it's still kind of morning, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to Spark Ed. My name is Margarita Hernandez. I'm the director here at Spark for the Entrepreneurial Services. And today we are excited. In our event, we'll be covering patenting in the early years, a coming of age story. So ideas start from back of a beverage napkin and then they begin to grow. And with this specific event, we're kind of going to be talking about the intellectual property component and how do you grow an idea and how do you protect yourself and kind of covering some of the fundamentals of how does that process look, and some of the challenges that really just kind of are during that first kind of era of how you grow as a startup, to something much bigger. And I would like to actually welcome Ashley Sloat, who will be presenting today, and her team from Aurora Consulting. Ashley Sloat is the president and director of patenting strategy at Aurora Consulting. This is a USPTO registered patent practitioner. That's what she is. And she specializes in development and management of patent portfolios for startup ventures and emerging growth opportunities. So let's welcome her here today. And yeah, let's get started.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Margarita. And I'm happy to be here today, everybody, and looking forward to a great presentation, but also great questions and chat, because I know this is a big topic for a lot of people. And so I'd love to have your feedback and questions as we go through this. My hope is to address most of the questions at the end of the presentation. I usually don't catch the indicator for new comments. And so just let me know when you have a question and we'll address it at the end. So as Margarita said, this is patenting in the early years, a coming of age story. And so we'll get started here. All right. So I love a good movie. Who doesn't, right? And I'm sure during the COVID pandemic, we've all been watching a lot of movies. But I've always been drawn in particular to the classic coming of age stories where you have this youthful character whom we grow to love and who faces this first major conflict in their personal lives. And by the time the credits are rolling at the end, life is good for the character and they're satisfyingly brought to some profound realization about their future. And I think startup stories are a lot like these coming of age stories. And that's why we've chosen this as a topic for this presentation today. So you have your incredible cast of soon-to-be stars, just like in the startup world, who are transforming from strong individual characters to a team, who are faced with conflict and more than a few crappy jobs and maybe even some interesting hats and challenges seemingly around every corner with ample opportunity for discovery and growth. So both are incredible stories of adversity, inspiration, understanding, growth, and transformation. In the movie, the story arc is highly predictable and consistent, but real life, as we all know, is very messy and unpredictable. You have an idea, like Margarita said, maybe it's on the back of a napkin, maybe even have a company. Your idea has infinite potential, but it's still sort of awkward, like an awkward teenager. So how do you ensure successful transformation from this nascent idea to a mature, protected innovation? Not being intentional about this at every step of the way is simply risky business. So today we're going to talk about why you're here and what I'm hoping to help you with. We've been in the patent strategy business for a long time, and the same questions and irreversible trapdoors keep on coming up time and time again for different companies. And during this early stage, addressing these different trapdoors are extremely vital. So today I will provide answers to common questions and strategy recommendations for those early years between idea and granted patent. We'll discuss the fundamentals of protecting your idea, how you can talk about it, and what you can and can't do with it to create irreversible issues for yourself with the patent office. We'll tackle the fundamentals of your provisional, when it should be filed, how to maximize your runway during that year of pendency, and then we'll dive into what you should be focused on during that year and afterwards as you're moving towards the conversion to a full application. So let's get started. So why should I get a patent? So before we get into all of the details of this, let's think about why the patent system was created. So the government created the patent system for a very particular reason. They wanted to promote the progress of the useful arts. And by doing this, they basically give you, the inventor, a limited monopoly of 20 years in exchange for your disclosing your invention to the public. And so it's this through this controlled patenting process that their hope is that innovators read other work by other innovators and then build upon that work and therefore promote the progress of the useful arts. And so this whole system was designed to kind of help everybody out, but it is a little bit tricky. And so let's dive into that further. So what is the value of a patent? And so it is to maximize the use of funding, grow your company, and protect your IP from being copied. Patents are the strongest form of protection and one of the best possible returns on investment. According to a recent Bloomberg Law report, the median value of a portfolio with one issued patent is $338,000. According to another 2012 study, the average valuation per patent is $1.1 million in software company IPOs. And lastly, in a 2016 MIT study, they found that startup growth is 35 times higher for companies who apply for patents. So it's clear that this system was created to promote the progress of the useful arts, which is fantastic because we all like new technology, new things, better, life, better well-being that is brought by technology. And we also have this incredible value of the patent system for your company. So why should startups file patents? And I think we can all appreciate that startups have unique requirements when you compare them to more established, either younger companies or older companies. For startups, the reason that they file patents is because they need to stimulate investment or acquisition. For many investors, patents represent a simple checkbox, but for many more, it is a way to protect your intellectual property from being copied, to show that you have something of value, to show something that you're serious about your technology. It can also be used to deter patent infringement lawsuit. So it again shows that you're serious and shows that even the patent office thinks that you have something that's protectable. So it basically discourages other people from copying you. It's highly unlikely, I wouldn't say it's impossible, but it is unlikely that another company is going to sue you for patent infringement because you're not at this stage probably taking away market share. But as you do get bigger, it's important to have that patent as a chip to also be a force to reckon with other companies as you move through the space. And they also want to carve out contributions to partnerships. And this is really, really important. And we've actually seen a lot of issues with this of late. When you start a partnership with a university, a technology firm, with any other company, you want to make sure it is clear what you are bringing to the partnership versus what they're bringing to the partnership, and then collectively what you develop together. And so, for example, Amazon recently partnered with 37 healthcare startups to work on innovations to improve operational and clinical effectiveness. It would behoove those 37 startups to basically make sure they had a patent filed before undertaking this partnership with Amazon. So it is clear what they contributed independently to the partnership versus what they developed collectively with Amazon. And to further illustrate and underline this point, we recently had a company that they did not have a development agreement in advance. And so now we're going through this issue of where each party, the development firm and our client, is arguing about who owns the rights to what. And that shouldn't be the case because there should have been really clear marks, really clear lines in the sand. So now that we've talked about, what the patent system is and why you should get a patent, the value of a patent to a startup, let's talk about when you should file a patent, and in particular, a provisional. So to make sure everybody's on the same page, let's talk about what is a provisional patent. It is a placeholder patent application, which means that you get a filing date, and that filing date is very critical to establish what was known prior to your filing, and then, what you knew at the time of your filing. So details are really important. It pens for 1 year, and it serves as the priority document for future filings. And what do I mean by priority document? This is the start of your patent family or your patent families. And so it's very critical that it is done well, because when it's the same invention and you're moving it through the patent process, if you're going to claim priority to this document, it has to disclose it in sufficient detail so that your future claims are supported, find disclosure in this original document. And most importantly, you can also say patent pending, which is really exciting for a startup. So what do you need for a patent filing? You need constructive or actual reduction to practice, and I'll describe this in a later slide exactly what this means. You need to describe the technology in sufficient detail to enable one of skill in the art. And so what I mean there is that you should describe it in your patent application in such detail that another person that is similarly skilled to as you can pick it up, read it, and make your technology without undue experimentation. It may take some tweaking, some workout, some experimentation, but it can't be undue. And then you also need a list of inventors who were involved in conception, the ideation. If you simply hand CAD drawings to somebody and they just make it without any contribution to the inventive process, then that person is not an inventor. And lastly, you need to be the first to file. And so what do I mean by being the first to file? So the US used to be a first to invent country, which meant that you could use a lab notebook to prove invention, or you hear probably the stories of people mailing their invention to them, so would get a postmark date to prove that they invented something first. That no longer applies. We are now a first inventor to file country similar to the rest of the world. So what this means in practice is that if A invents first, but he decides that he's going to iterate on it a little bit before patenting it, or he's going to maybe set it on the shelf, or maybe he's not super serious about it. And at the same time, or nearly the same time, B invents a similar idea, but B decides that it's ready and rushes to the patent office, whereas it's only later that A finally goes to the patent office. Who wins this race? B wins, and A is left wondering what happened, because we are a first to file country. You need to file early and often. But there are timing implications to this. You can't just file that napkin with the patent office. It does have to be disclosed with particularity, as we discussed. And we'll go into that in more detail here soon. So what a provisional patent is not, it is not examined. So that means that the patent office essentially is sitting on the shelf in the patent office. They look at it for some formal requirements, but otherwise it is just waiting for you to claim priority to it roughly a year later. It is not enforceable. You cannot enforce your provisional against a competitor, and it is not a quick or thoughtless filing. It has to be intentional. It has to be disclosed with particularity. This is going to form the apex of the rest of your patent family. So it should have as much detail as you have at the time of filing it, and you shouldn't be holding back details. So now moving on to when should I file a provisional? And we talked about this whole constructive and actual reduction to practice. And this all feeds into whether your idea is patent ready. So how do you determine whether your technology is patent ready? So there are a couple different indicators, one of it which is predictability of the art and complexity of the art. The more predictable or the less complex your art is, the more that constructive reduction to practice is sufficient, meaning that you can just write about it and draw it, right? You can use CAD, PowerPoint, whatever to draw it, and you can just write about it. You don't actually have to make it to reduce it to practice. So highly predictable or not complex arts are basic products, devices, especially those devices that are dumb or not software implemented. These are highly predictable. It's very clear what's going to happen when you plug in A to B to C. When you connect those pieces together, it's not unpredictable. Is it going to maybe do exactly what you want it to do when you make it? Maybe not, but it's pretty clear. It's very easy to implement. When you get to the more complex arts or less predictable arts, like the chemical arts and biotech, that's where you need to move more towards actual reduction to practice for something to be patent ready. I'm not saying that you have to have all the data, all the details, all the nitty gritty for your provisional, but you should have some preliminary data that leads you to believe that it is going to behave like you think it's going to behave. As you can imagine, when you create a chemical, you may think that putting an amino group on a certain terminus is going to make the drug behave in a certain way, but you may find that maybe the dose profile isn't correct, that maybe the metabolism of it is not what you thought. Maybe it binds to something that you didn't think it would bind to, or maybe it has unintended negative consequences. And so it's these highly unpredictable arts that have led the USPTO to take an approach that you need to have more actual reduction to practice. And so this could be laboratory results, it could be animal studies, cell culture results, but you need to be able to have some kind of data. And this will allow you, the more data in the more situations that you have, the broader the claim you can get. If you only show use of the chemical in one very narrow indication or very narrow use case, you're going to get a very narrow claim. If you want broad claims, you need to show its use in multiple different situations, doses, cell lines, animals, that kind of thing. And then I put software in the middle because, sure, can you potentially constructively reduce to practice software? Sure. But in the current climate of software being kind of iffy from a patentability perspective with the patent office, the more that you can actually reduce it to practice, the better, because then you can include the nitty gritty details about how it was actually implemented. Not to saying that you have to put code in your patent application. I actually would not recommend that. Maybe some pseudocode on occasion, but I definitely wouldn't recommend it. But you do need to have details around how somebody of skill in the art, how they could pick up your application, read it, and then, make the software. So, that's where software is kind of in the middle. So I hope that's clear, but if not, we can have some more questions at the end about that. So back to the coming of age movies for a second. I hope everyone has seen Say Anything. And if not, this might be a good weekend for you to do that. I guess the weather's probably going to be nice, so it's maybe not a great weekend for it. But if you haven't seen it, you're missing out. We chose the iconic boombox scene from Say Anything as a feature image for this talk for a very specific reason. It's because you cannot just say anything. Do not just say anything. If there's one thing you want to remember for this talk, it's don't say anything until you have your provisional filing date secured. Once you have your provisional filed, lift up that boombox and say what you want to say. But until then, radio silence. Don't say anything. I get a lot of questions in this area, and specifically around what you can and can't do in terms of public disclosure, sales, websites, all that kind of stuff, and how it impacts the ability to file a patent. And this couldn't be more important. We get a lot of companies that unfortunately mess this up and then create irreversible issues for themselves and for us. And so, not to say that there's not workarounds, but ideally don't say anything until you file your provisional. So what does public disclosure mean? So when should you file your patent application? Oops, sorry about that. And it should be before public disclosure. So that means before presenting or publishing your patent-ready invention. That means before responding to a request for proposal if the technology is patent-ready. If you are filing a grant application, those grants usually are a promise to have an invention, right? You show that you're going to carry out certain experiments or certain things to have an invention, but a grant doesn't typically trigger the public disclosure bar. But if you are responding to a request for proposal in which the technology is patent ready, you are essentially promising to sell or license this technology to the company that has put out the RFP. So this could trigger the public disclosure bar. And you should definitely file a provisional before selling or offering for sale your technology. And I'm going to go a little deeper into this last point here because it is so critical and a lot of companies do mess this one up. So what is not an offer for sale? Advertising or pre-announcing a yet to be developed product. Let's say you just have kind of a general concept, but you really haven't reduced it to practice. You aren't really even sure how you would. That kind of advertising or pre-announcing is probably okay. Transferring technical knowledge about a process when it still requires the recipient to develop the product itself usually does not trigger the on-sale bar. Manufacturing agreements or experimental use. And this is where you need to maintain control of the invention. So for example, there was a case around experimental use in which it was crossing signals, lights and stuff like that for traffic movement. And the company could prove that it was only their engineers that ever accessed the equipment, and they were swapping in and out parts, testing different things. They had proof of that. And they also had proof that nobody saw what they were doing or what was in those boxes. And so they proved that they maintained control of the technology. So this experimental use is not an afterthought. It is not a, after the fact, cover your butt kind of situation. It is a thoughtful, purposeful experimental use case where you're, intentionally going to do something with experimental use in mind and not as a, trying to fix something later. What are likely offers for sale? So what are likely problematic things that you can do? Licensing agreements. Usually licensing agreements are a promise to sell or license a technology to a company. So this could trigger or be viewed as an offer for sale. Performance or services related to a product. We get this question a lot for software. For example, we have companies that create software and then they sell services based on the software. They're actually not selling the software itself, but they are providing reports, services, whatever, to clients or customers based on that software. And that is considered an offer for sale according to the Patent Office. Providing technical drawings to a potential licensee. And this is because your technical drawings show that it is patent ready. So if you are providing technical drawings, it is patent ready. You need to file a patent before engaging with a potential licensee. Unaccepted or canceled orders. So I don't care, unfortunately, if somebody said, I don't want to buy it from you, or they said they were going to and then canceled the order. That still all counts as an offer for sale. And then similarly, secret sales. If you are using software or your clients are using software, but they have no idea how the software works, or if you somehow have created a drug that you have sold to somebody, but they have no idea how the drug works, it still is considered an offer for sale. So unfortunately, you have to be very careful. And so I would highly recommend engaging with your practitioner about your activities before you do those activities to verify whether or not they are going to create an issue for you. Because I guarantee if they are going to create an issue for you, you'd be better off to get something on file, even if it is a quicker filing than you are to try to fix it later, which is usually more difficult. So, but if you do happen to publicly disclose, sell it, do a licensing agreement, there is some grace in the form of a grace period. In certain countries, there is a 1-year grace period, and some there is a 6-month. But unfortunately, in certain countries like China, Europe, and India, there is no grace period. So as you can see, the 1-year grace period countries, and this is just a sampling, there are other countries, but these are some of the main ones in which we have clients that file. For example, the US, Brazil, Australia, Canada, South Korea, and Mexico. And Japan has a 6-month grace period. Now, please note the asterisk by Australia, Canada, and Japan. This time period is with relationship to the international filing. So if you publicly disclose and then a year later file your provisional patent application, and then a year later do your international patent application, that 1 year or 6-month grace period will not apply because you've used 2 years of time. If you publicly disclose and have interest in countries like Australia, Canada, and Japan, you need to probably go right to an international filing and bypass the provisional. And so we can discuss some of these different timelines in a later slide. So now that we know the value of a patent to a company and when should you file a provisional when it is patent ready, how do you maximize your runway during the year of pendency? So here's a depiction of what your year looks like. At minimum, what you shouldn't be doing during this year is taking your foot off the gas pedal. You need to be prototyping, talking to customers, pitching, and seeking investment. And, primarily because, by the conclusion of this year, you need to have a pretty good idea of what your technology is going to be in terms of patenting so that you have a very first valuable patent portfolio. Not to say that you can't back inventions in to an older filing, but it does become more difficult, especially for some foreign countries that are a little bit more difficult from a disclosure viewpoint. So prototyping, what does this mean? It means iterating on your product to move from constructive to actual reduction to practice. And this is particularly important for those more complex or less predictable arts. So for software, chemicals, biotech, I would definitely try to move as quickly as possible through this and try to do it in as many different ways as possible. From a dumb device or basic product, I would still encourage movement towards actual reduction to practice because you still may find that there are things that are more complicated than what you originally anticipated, or you find that maybe consumers don't like certain pieces of your technology that you thought they might. And this is where the voice of the customer comes in as well. Talk to customers, clients. There are blinded studies you can do. There are blinded questions you can ask that help you discern how your technology is gonna work with a client. And you may find that they actually like features of it that weren't in theory going to be your top features. And that can also impact how you do your patent process and how you do claiming. So for example, we had a client that does catheters, and they thought the fact that they could access the neurovasculature in the brain was going to be the main driving feature or the main driving desire for interventionalists using their catheter system. And what they thought from their voice of customer surveys was actually it was the fact that access, bypassing that aortic or getting through that aortic arch, which is very tortuous, was actually the biggest driver for interventionalists wanting to adopt a technology such as theirs. And so it kind of changed their viewpoint around marketing, but also around how they might approach their first patent filings. So it can be highly valuable to get that customer feedback early. Also, I would start to look at contracts with contractors, engineering firms, or even your employees. Make sure that and this is actually even before you file your provisional, ideally, but if you are still contracting during this time, make sure that any contracts include explicit hereby assigns or obligation to assign language. This means that the contractors or engineers are going to give you, your company, all the rights to the technology that is developed. Highly important, and investors will want to see that technology is assigned to your company. And I would highly recommend it because it's also a firewall between inventors or you and your company. And also make sure you are executing joint development agreements in which you, the paying customer, own all IP arising out of that relationship. It's okay that the engineering firm brings expertise and technology that they own. Again, that's clear from that arrangement, but that you own all IP arising out of this. We've had some issues recently where this wasn't done. And now we're in the midst of a big debate around the technology company saying that they own certain things and the client being mad because they paid for certain things and they should own it, but now neither side's willing to move. So we could avoid all of this if we just had this agreement up front. And we will also be doing a talk about this in September. And I believe that Carly is going to share something at the end of the talk about this talk coming up in September. Pitching. Ideally, don't pitch your idea until your patent application is filed. However, if it is kind of like pre-announcing or pre-idea, then maybe it's not as big of a deal. But ideally, don't pitch until your patent application is filed. Your pitch should include a high-level overview of the technology, save the nitty-gritty for those serious investors, and only share the provisional after those individuals have signed non-disclosure agreements. I know that some investors won't sign NDAs, and that's fine, but just make sure that they are serious and well-vetted investors then. And part of the other reason for my encouraging this is that a provisional is not findable by anybody. Okay. So it's sitting in the patent office, but I, as a third party, can't type in your serial number into the patent office's database and pull it up. So it's in a stealth period. And it's in a stealth period for actually 18 months. So even after you convert it, there's another 6-month period of where it can't be found before it's published. And that is another way that you get a competitive advantage with other companies, is that nobody knows what you are doing outside of your telling them, either through websites, pitches, talks, trade shows. And so you want to be careful about to what degree you share your technology, because that is another advantage for this to be stealth. So just be careful about that. What are investors looking for in your filing? And also if from you at a company level, to demonstrate knowledge of the competitive landscape. So I know in pitches, you typically have a slide that shows different competitors and how you might be different or how you're approaching the field differently. And that is one view of a competitive landscape, but I'm talking about a different competitive landscape. In this regard, I'm talking about the patent competitive landscape. So what have other companies and inventors, universities, what have they been publishing that could create a patentability issue for you? And I'll describe what that means. But, this is where you basically hire a group such as Aurora to do a search for you to understand what the competitive landscape looks like. What have people been filing on and what issues are you going to face in terms of patent office examination? Your patent should also cover your minimum viable product or your commercializable product. I do understand that between MVP and commercializable product, there is going to be significant developments. So at minimum, you do want to cover your commercializable product. And if you can also cover your MVP, that's a bonus. Your patent should also cover verticals that have the same or similar problem. If you are solving a particular problem in healthcare, but that same problem exists in other verticals, then you should try to capture those other verticals in your patent application filing. If you have a design that performs, if there's other designs that perform the same function of the design that you've chosen, make sure you include those. For example, if you have an anti-buckling system for a catheter, there's probably tons of different designs you could come up with. Some may be less useful and others may be more useful, but include all of those. And also designs that solve the same problem. Try to really think about your technology in a problem solution approach. And whatever that problem is that you're trying to solve, try to think of other ways you could solve that same problem. So if it's like a network communication issue, think of all the different ways that you could solve that outside of the way that you have identified. And so these are all great ways to add value and breadth to your patent portfolio, but still maintain focus on what you're actually doing. And brainstorming sessions can be a great tool for getting at these different points that I have here. And lastly, investors ultimately are going to want to know whether you have freedom to operate. This is the best to assess when you actually have an MVP and or your commercializable product. If you do it too early, it's kind of a waste of time and money, but you definitely don't want to do it too late. So exactly what is freedom to operate? And again, this is something that we can help you with, is basically a search, just like a patentability. So patenting your invention, this is what we call patentability. This is the thing that the patent office assesses when you submit your patent application to them. They pick it up, they do a search, and they determine whether it is patentable. The right to practice your invention is freedom to operate. So that means that there is no issued patent out there that blocks you from making, using, or selling your technology. And you ask, how could that be? And let me go to a very simple but very illustrative example of this. So think of Edison. Edison created the clear glass light bulb, and his patent claim was something pretty broad. It basically was like a filament, in a bulb that, when electrically connected, produced light. So quite a broad patent because, well, rightfully so, it was one of the earliest, if only, filings to that kind. Pipkin came along and decided that there were inadequacies in Edison's design. It was too hot, it was too bright, and so Pipkin decided to create the frosted glass light bulb. And again, he also got a patent because his idea solved particular problems with Edison's design. It had never been disclosed in the art, and so it was patentable over Edison's invention. Think of Edison as, describing A, and Pipkin described A prime. It was still patentable because of that prime. But now the problem is that Edison got such a broad patent that Pipkin could not practice his frosted glass light bulb without the help of Edison. And when I say help, I mean that Pipkin had to seek a license from Edison or, agree to pay some sort of royalty to Edison. So what does this mean in words? So patentability means others are excluded from making, using, offering for sale, selling, or importing your invention into the United States or whatever country you have the patent. So Pipkin could still stop people from making, using, selling his frosted glass light bulb. However, Pipkin did not have freedom to operate. He was excluded from making, using, or selling his invention into the US because Edison had a broad patent that still covered Pipkin's design. So when you have freedom to operate, this means that you are not excluded. So what, from a, searching perspective, what does this mean? So as a searching group, we look for art or references that create a patentability issue or a freedom to operate issue. From a patentability perspective, that means we look for websites, journal articles, patents or patent applications, dissertations, videos, really anything in the public that discloses your technology. Now, you might say that that would be pretty easy to find, and actually you might be kind of surprised at, there are lots of times nitty-gritty details or interesting twists of technology where we can't find those. And there's also lots of legal argumentation that can be made to separate out your technology from references that were found. From a freedom to operate perspective, we look for issued patents that are not expired, because again, remember that 20-year time frame, and whether they have paid their maintenance fees. If they didn't pay their maintenance fees, that patent is no longer in force. and is not a freedom to operate issue. And so sometimes you may even find that there is an issued patent that may be problematic, but that it's expiring in a year and you're not even planning to go to market for the next 2 years. And so, freedom to operate, there's lots of dimensions of that. But again, we could help you with something like that. So now that you've learned, what to do with your year of pendency and the whole patentability, freedom to operate, and hopefully you're all experts on this. If not, we can definitely talk about it more because I know it's kind of sticky. What lies beyond the provisional filing year? So once you have your provisional, you can do a non-provisional, which is the US only, or do an international filing. And you can do this in like 150 plus countries in the world. I would say Europe, Russia, China, Singapore, Malaysia, Indonesia, Africa, lots of countries in the world have a patent system. So what is a non-provisional? It is examined by the United States Patent and Trademark Office, and it's also sometimes called a utility or an invention patent in other countries. A grant is an issued patent, and it is finally enforceable. So you're moving from that patent pending phase to your issued patent phase. What is an international application? So there are two different flavors. One is a placeholder for filing 150 plus countries, and we're going to focus on that today because it is the most prevalent kind. This placeholder is under the Patent Cooperation Treaty, or people call it PCT for shorthand. It preserves your right for filing in over 150 countries in the world. There's also the Paris Convention route, in which you take your provisional, you iterate on it, we add material to it, and then at that 1-year time frame, we take it directly into a specific country. The most notable country in which you would use the Paris Convention is Taiwan, because Taiwan is not part of the Patent Cooperation Treaty. Your PCT pens for a total of 30 months, and then at that point, you select specific countries for examination. And this also represents a significant ballooning in cost. So if you are going to get investors, it does behoove you to get them on to help you with a significant ballooning in cost. So what are the various patenting pathways? Like I said, a provisional pens for 1 year, and then you can go to a US non-provisional and or an international app. An international application does preserve your US rights as well. So you could also go into the US 1.5 years later after filing that international app. You could also go straight to a non-provisional and then to an international app and then country selection 1.5 years later. Or like I said, in some cases where you have publicly disclosed, you might want to go right to an international application and then 30 months or 2.5 years later, do country selection. And do note that at the timeframes of provisional to non-provisional or non-provisional to international, you can add material. So when you're iterating on your product, any new insight that you have, you can add it to your application at these conversion points. You cannot add material when you do your country selection. There is some unique strategy things you can do for the US to add material, but that does not apply to other countries. So once you enter your country, what does the process look like? It looks like filing. That means you may have to file a translation and maybe even exam request. A lot of times in the US and Europe, for example, this is all rolled in. The exam request is rolled into the filing fees. In other countries like Japan, Australia, Canada, you have up to 3 years in which to request exams. So this can provide some nice buffer in terms of expense. You then go through prosecution, in which you receive rejections from the patent office, and then you basically argue and or make amendments or changes to your claims to get them issued to overcome the art or the references that were found. Then you have the grant procedure, which you pay grant fees. And then in certain areas like Europe, you go through the validation phase. You select certain European countries in which you want your patent to be enforced. And then lastly, you pay annuities. Every country, as far as I can think of right now, has yearly annuities to pay once your patent is granted. The US has a weird schedule. They do 3.5, 7.5, and 11.5 years, but every other country is yearly. And then for countries like Canada and Europe, you actually have to pay these annuities during pendency as well. So this is why I said, international filing can be a significant ballooning in cost. So you want to enter it carefully and with a lot of consideration. So how long does it take to get a US patent? So typical prosecution, it's going to take as long as it does. Through the patent prosecution highway, if you have claims that are allowed in another patent office, you can fast track them in the US. Accelerated examination is a very burdensome process, but you basically conduct a pre-exam search, and then you have to basically do claim charting and show the patentability of all your claims. You're basically doing the patent office's job. And then prioritized examination, you pay an extra fee to the patent office for a final disposition in 1 year. So what does this look like from time? So typical prosecution is 2 to 5 years. The patent prosecution highway is 1 to 1.5 years. Accelerated examination, 1/2 to 1.25 year. And prioritized examination is 1 year. And we've actually had a lot of success with prioritized examination. So if you have a fully baked idea and you're rip, rare, and ready to go, I highly recommend prioritized examination. The cost, patent prosecution highway, not much more expensive. Essentially, it's one more form for us to fill out. Accelerated examination is quite a lot more expensive. You have to do that search, the claim charting, all the arguments. And prioritized examination is just the extra fee to the patent office. And so that's probably kind of the middle of the road cost-wise. But utility patent is just one part of a comprehensive approach to your technology. You want to fill as much surface area as possible in the space of your technology. And how you do this is with a comprehensive approach that tackles IP from all angles. This includes thinking about utility patents, as we've just described, for your devices or manufacturers, processes, methods. It means maybe doing design patents for your graphical user interface or the ornamental appearance of your product. Maybe you have a really pretty, desirable appearance of your product. Maybe copywriting for your code. If you've been following the Google Oracle, we know that software code can be copyrighted, but maybe not APIs, although they didn't really rule on that. But you can also do copywriting your sales material, your website, anything like that. You can also get a trademark for your company name. The more, think about it more from a fanciful and arbitrary name perspective. You want to try to stay away from generic or descriptive names because those aren't going to be as readily trademarkable. And then lastly, trade secrets. These are for things that are difficult to reverse engineer. A trade secret provides protection for misappropriation, somebody stealing your idea, but if somebody reverse engineers it, they can use it. So this is great for, maybe methods of manufacture, maybe recipes, customer lists, sales protocols, business methods. So definitely consider those. But again, this has to be an active process. You have to put active systems in place to ensure trade secret protection. So here are the key takeaways. File before you publicly disclose. Carefully time the filing of your provisional, maximize your year by iterating, tailoring your technology to your customers, and pitching to get that investment. And then finally, orchestrate your patent strategy for timeliness and budget. Be an active participant in this process so that there are no surprises. And lastly, as we wrap up, we'll close with this inspirational closing scene from Say Anything. You're at an incredibly exciting stage in your journey on the path to your success story. Challenge the norms, take risks, defy expectations, do great things, but along the way, please do be mindful of the steps that you're taking to protect your innovation. And for the love of God, don't just say anything. And so with that, I'll take any questions.
Thank you, Ashley. We don't have any questions in the actual Q&A box, but we'll leave a few minutes if there's anybody who wants to submit any questions at this time. Please do so now. Okay. I wanted to put out a question, and that so working at Ann Arbor Spark, I work with lots of clients, and that means that some of my a large proportion of my clients are very green. This is the first time that they've created a startup. They're working on an idea. And so for some of them, they have no idea what IP is and what their role is at the beginning start of this. So in my experience, I kind of just wanted to ask the question, what is expected from a CEO, from a startup, from a founder when they start this process with you? What is their role as to what do they need to fill out? What do they need to be able to create for you so that you have an awareness of what their technology is? And then, so that's kind of like my first question. And I guess I'll hold right there because I have another question after that.
Yeah, absolutely. What we at least at minimum encourage inventors to do is a data dump to us, right? They have, in theory, drawings, they have technical documents, they have, even sketches, notebooks, whatever. At minimum, give that to us. so that we can start to think through the technology. And then a lot of times what happens is a little bit of a back and forth of, trying to pull more details out of the inventors, ask them to do some brainstorming, ask them to provide more details around how this might be implemented or how it was, how it works. And so, we do have it, an invention disclosure form, but it's so formal and heavy that we find the best way is just, give us everything you have about this technology, and then let's work together to pull the details out as much as we can. And because I think sometimes inventors, they self-censor. They think that certain things that they're doing are just routine. That's not super patentable. That's not noteworthy. And sometimes, maybe those details aren't the innovative piece, but maybe they're the piece that we need from a disclosure, or maybe it's the piece that we need from a patentability perspective, or, showing the patent office that your software is eligible for patenting.
Thank you. All right, we have actually some questions into the question box here, so I'll start reading these out. Is
Awesome.
there a strategy for fighting knockoff products from other countries? Example, China.
Yeah. So, the best thing I think you can do is, file. China is getting better. You can do filings in China as well, and they are getting better. Even the lawsuit. I think historically the way lawsuits have worked in China is when the government decided that you were going to win or lose. That's kind of what happened. But now it seems like they're being more favorable towards outside companies. You can also, I believe, put your patents and stuff on notice with border protection, so that as trades, different products are coming in across the borders, they can actually be reviewed for infringement of different patents. But honestly, it is just hard. I think the best thing you can do is create a highly valuable company, a highly beautiful experience for customers, so that they want to buy from you versus the knockoff product. Because honestly, like, regardless if you have a patent or not, like, we actually had a client, kid you not, who they had patents all over the world, and they had contracted with a doctor in China. For whatever reason, didn't have the contracts in place with him that they should have early on. The doctor literally took their device and made filings in China for the exact same device, like spot on. And it was granted in China, and should never even been granted given how much art and references that we had out there for our own technology. So there's only so much you can do, but you can also set up monitoring. Like, we can help you with that, monitoring the landscape for those different products, so you can at least try to deter potential infringers.
Thank you. All right, so I'm going to give you the second question. Oh, this is just she loves people really enjoy your 80s comments and references. So,
Right. Thanks. Showing my age, I guess. Although even some of these I think were a little bit pre my time.
okay, so here is another question. Can you comment on the search process as USPTO versus PCT?
Yeah, so the search process, is that what the question was?
Yes, the search process at USPTO versus PCT.
Yeah, so every office is going to be better or worse at the search process. So the US uses a combination of all the codes. So there's different coding systems that they use in their back end to find different relevant art areas and technology areas. The PCT could use the US as its searching authority, and we actually select that up front. You can use the US, the European Patent Office, the Korean Patent Office, China's patent office. Am I missing one? I might be missing one. But anyways, you can select which searching authority that you can use, and it has different costs associated with it, and some are better than others. So I would say that the most stringent searchers are either Japan or Europe. The US tends to kind of fall in the middle in terms of the quality of our search and the art that they find. And so ultimately, it's a cost decision, how much you want to pay for that international search that is not binding on any future country. It gives you a really good idea of what is out there, but it doesn't mean that any country is going to rely on those references or art from a patentability perspective. So it's a cost consideration, but they're basically using all the international databases. In theory, they're all searching the same information. It's just certain searchers are better than others. We have Shelly in our team. She's been doing it forever. And, she's, really great at finding art because she knows how to kind of work keywords in the databases, whereas maybe some people might not have as much experience in that area. So, but again, in theory, they're all using the same databases.
Thank you. Okay, so there's a question here. What are your company fees? And I will just encourage everybody to reach out to Ashley's group, unless you want to comment on
I
any
mean,
of
the only thing I
that.
can comment is, we do try to we are not a one size fit all. We do try to highly tailor to every startup, knowing that not every startup is the same, doesn't have the same requirements, or doesn't have the same expertise. Some startups we work with are fantastic at CAD, so they provide us fantastic drawings, or some people really love writing and have really good documents, so they provide us a really great base patent application that we heavily edit. So it just, we try to complement your team just like all the members of your team complement each other.
That's an awesome answer, and I can speak on behalf of that from the clients and my own experience actually working with your group. So thank you.
Thanks, Margarita.
All right, so next comment or question, um, and you basically answered what this question is, which is, what does this be for a small nonprofit who wants to file a priority patent? Um,
I mean, I can say so that just so you know too, the patent office also does not view companies one size fits all. There is micro entity status that has certain income requirements that you have to prove. There are small entity, which most of you for sure are small entity, but some of you may qualify for micro. And then there's large entity, which is like 500 plus employees. So, do ask your practitioner whether you may qualify for micro entity, because that's another halving of the USPTO fees.
Thank you. Okay, so this is one of the last questions. How about if it's a software platform? Really no data dump available, mock website platform along with notes?
Yes, I mean, it's, really what we want to understand is what are the steps that the software is executing. And we also want that in, pretty good detail, right? It's not enough to kind of say, you receive some data, you extract some pieces out of it, and then you put an indication of, whatever. We need to know in more detail what is being received, how it's being processed, and how is it being filtered, analyzed, cleaned up. If it's machine learning, what are the training data sets that you're using, or how are you structuring the training? What's coming out as an output of that? Are you using multiple machine learning systems? Are you modifying the base machine learning? From a software perspective, I mean, examples of the different databases, or are you modifying database structure to make it work? So it's that, again, thinking about all the problems that you've faced and the solutions that you are using to solve those problems. That's really the nitty gritty of what we need. Because with software, as you all probably know, it's a little bit difficult. We've had good success, but it's through kind of trying to figure out the real problems that clients have tried to solve, and then finding ways to make sure that the patent office can't view it as a mental process. So if you're describing your technology in such a way that you could reasonably argue that somebody could do it in their head, then you're not going deep enough into what your software is doing.
Awesome. Okay, so those are all the questions that we have. Um, and yes, thank you, Carly. If you want to learn more, we do have, there's some other events too that are going to be coming up in the future here. Yep, September 16th. Actually, we'll be returning to discuss software patents, actually, while we're on that topic. And then if you have any other questions or you want to follow up with her, her information is there on the slide. Um, and thank you very much for, presenting today, Ashley. We look forward to having you in the future. You get a great landscape into the introduction and fundamental points here. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody. And yes, happy to answer any more questions. But, I adore Spark. You guys do great work. So thanks for this opportunity. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. All right, everybody. Have a great afternoon and a great rest of your week, and we'll see you again soon.
Take care.